We're going to have a look today at some of the values and concerns that arise from the Truman Show. We'll have a little bit of an extended analysis of some of them, and we'll look at some of the quotes. So remember that the film is directed by Peter Weir, and it's an allegory, so we call it an allegorical satire of our postmodern world. It's released on October 9th, 1988. And it's very much a film of that time, though the concerns are quite relevant to our context today. So let's go back and have a look at a review of the social concerns and values in the film. So that's from the previous PowerPoint. We reflected a common late 1990s postmodern values. He reflected his zeitgeist, so the zeitgeist is kind of the mood of the time, and his personal milieu. So a lot of it was very much of his time. In this film, he looks at the relationship between people and their social environment. He's also looking at the Christian values. He's looking at those, and he's looking at the rise of secularism. In the film, we question traditional values, and a lot of them are addressed, such as he looked at the futility of an idealized life, and so, of course, the setting of the Truman Show is a seemingly suburban utopia. Utopia for Christoph, but not so much for Truman. We looked at mass consumerism and the commodification of life. Of course, we know that Truman was considered a commodity or a product. The advertising product placement in the film, and the film became secondary to the products and the marketing. So it was a money-making machine. Remember that also we predicted the 24-hour news and social media cycles. So this is before that they had 24-hour news. He also looked at the loss of privacy and the cult of fame. That's famous for being famous, and that's of course things like Big Brother and the Kardashians and that kind of thing. One of the other big concerns he addressed was what was real and what was fake, and this was becoming quite an important construct in the late 1990s as people were spending more and more of their time on computers. And so the division of reality in the tangible world you could touch became quite different to that was presented on a screen. And so people were asking questions about human experience and reality, and that was because of this increased use of computers. So the nature of truth and the nature of reality are key leitmotifs in the film. So they're overarching motifs or ideas. So let's go back to this image. This is a summary of the main themes in the film. So if we go left to right, we have this one that we've already mentioned, simulated reality. Is it a simulacra? Is it real or not? The idea of being truthful or honest, and dishonest or fakery. So I've made up that word fakery. You can have honesty and dishonesty. Utopia is the idealized world, dystopia is the opposite of that. The impact of media on our lives and the invasion of privacy that comes with that. Freedom and choice. Commercialism, the rise of corporations and their influence on our lives and on our behaviours. And religion. So there's a lot of quite big themes happening in the film. So the first one we're going to look at is that of commercialization. And of course this is a key idea because Truman himself was a product. The way that Christoph and everyone actually treated Truman was that as if he wasn't worth as much as them. They treated him very much as a product. So let's have a look here. So the key terms that you should know and be able to write and spell are consumerism, product placement, and to a lesser extent product franchising. Product franchising are the spin-offs from the film, such as we have here this image down the bottom with the little old ladies with their Truman pillow that they hug. And I'm sure that when you were growing up, you had a Buzz Lightyear or a Woody toy or Barbie or Disney, or some toy or object that was based on a TV show or a book that you love, and that's called franchising, where the products have come from that. Okay, and the ultimate franchising is in this place, which is the Truman Cafe, and then this is actually the idea of people being obsessed. Okay, so amongst the strangest aspects of Truman's life as an unknowing reality television star is the constant product placement. From the knives they use, so that's the dice it, slice it, cut it, to the beer and hot chocolate they drink, a character is constantly promoting products. Throughout the film, these updates highlight the falsity that is Truman's life. The lack of control he has over his life extends even to the small details such as the beer he drinks. And we know that when Marlon comes to visit him, he doesn't say, "Would you like a beer?" He says, "I've got brewskis." So it's all about the advertising. Now, while we realise this occurs to Truman because he's on television, it may be something to say about consumerism in general. Perhaps the product placement says something about those who buy the products. Do we really have control over what we buy? Or is our relationship as consumers to advertising by corporations comparable to Truman's relationship to the director of his life, who is Christoph? So we've got all of these that are quite evident, and you can click on that link and watch the little clips of the product placement. Now, a couple of years ago, I read an article that said that the advertising is very effective, and even ads on television, on social media, are timed for special certain times of night. So, for example, back in the day when people watch television, they'd often have ads for chocolate or for ice cream from 8 p.m. onwards. And that's because that's when people have had dinner, they're sitting down to watch TV, and now, and so the power of suggestion is if you see a chocolate ad or an ice cream ad, suddenly you want one, even if you weren't intending to do it before. And so that's one of the impacts that these corporations have in our life in changing our behaviour. So it's not just Truman that's controlled. So here we've got a couple of the examples. So Meryl actually breaks character and she resorts to product placement when arguing with Truman. Okay, so he's just tried to escape. He's been tackled by very strange men in radioactive suits. Meryl's brought him back home. He's absolutely traumatized. They're having an argument. What does Meryl do? She advertises the hot chocolate drink, and this is her dialogue. "Why don't you let me fix some of this Macoca drink? All natural cocoa beans from the upper slopes of Mount Nicaragua. No artificial sweeteners." Truman, of course, reacts as you would expect. "What the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to? I've tasted other cocos. This is the best." Okay, so we have this really disconnected conversation between Meryl and Truman. They're having deep emotional conversation. They're arguing. What does Meryl do? She does the product placement. And it's because she doesn't want to argue with Truman. When he goes off script, when he's not behaving in a way that she and the corporation are happy with, she doesn't know what to do with him. And here's another example a bit earlier on. Meryl comes back from shopping. She gets off her bike and shows him, "Look what I bought at the checkout." And she holds up the Chef's Pal kitchen multi-knife and advertises it. And then after this one, when they had the argument, she's holding the knife out as a weapon. Truman You're scaring me because he wants to be emotionally honest. No, you're scaring me, Meryl. What are you going to do? Dice me, slice me, or peel me? There are so many choices. So, in the midst of the battle, emotional turmoil, Meryl has twice gone for products. Why? She sees Truman as less than a person. Poor old Truman. She sees him as a kind of a product, and he has become a product in in the eyes of this corporation, because he's the linchpin. He's the thing that they make their money from. So he's not a person, he's a product, because they can sell him. And so that's Meryl's go-to when they have conflict. And that comes to one of the other themes that we see in the film, freedom and choice. We know that Truman has tried to escape several times, even when he's younger, he's just talked about it. But his plans to leave Sea Haven have always been shot down, haven't they? And even to an extreme extent. Okay, so he's got no freedom of choice. So this image here is when he wanted to fly out to go to Fiji, and you have on the wall a really funny image that you wouldn't expect, would you, in a travel agent, and it's a plane being struck by lightning. It could happen to you. I tell you what, if the uh, flight centre had that on the wall at the Towers or at Rouse Hill, they wouldn't do a lot of business. And that's exactly the point. Now, towards the beginning of the, sorry, not in the beginning of the film, but in the middle of the film, when they have the interview with Christoph, there's an incidence of dramatic irony. Now, dramatic irony is when the audience knows more than the characters. Okay, so we see things slightly different than the characters who are immersed in the film or the play or the story do. When speaking of Truman, Christoph stated he could leave at any time if this were anything more than a vague ambition. If he was absolutely determined to discover the truth, there is no way we could prevent him. Truman eventually does discover the true nature of his reality, despite the continuous psychological manipulation and physical entrapment by Christoph and the team. So you can use that as a quote in your essays. He has continuous psychological and emotional manipulation and physical entrapment. And what happens when he tries to leave? So this is when he tries to drive out with Meryl. And this is one of the button cams. He's being attacked by the strange men in silver suits. And here is he now lying on the ground. He's got this eerie scene of them towering over him, and they catch him. So this is not somebody who's free to leave at any time. When he finally tricks them to go, we've got this image here which is profoundly disturbing because it's reminiscent of scenes of something you'd expect to see in a war film, when they join hands and they're searching for Truman, linked arms with the torches, and they're trying to find him. And then you have the image below it, which is the dog that was next door, and it too, no wonder Truman was afraid of it. Look at those teeth. So this is the image that's now showing us that Truman was right not to trust them, that they weren't ever going to let him escape, despite what Christoph has said. So this is part of his trickery, so to speak. In the same interview that Christoph said that, Sylvia rang in. Now Sylvia's, remember, his early love interest. Truman's life was not his own. He didn't have a real choice, and Sylvia knew this. And she said very angrily to Christoph, "What right do you have to take a baby and turn his life into some kind of mockery? Don't you ever feel guilty?" Well, damn, Sylvia, that's a very good question. because he doesn't have uh, the moral capacity of someone like God, who he's just human and he's flawed, isn't he? Christoph, of course, tries to justify himself. Remember, his name alludes to him pretending to be like God, Christoph of Christ. He says, I've given Truman the chance to live a normal life. The world, the place you live in, is the sick place. Sea Haven is the way the world should be. Now, this is Christoph's version of utopia. He gets to choose uh, what happens in it. He gets choice, but Truman doesn't. So there's no freedom of choice for Truman. And Sylvia understands that. And this is a really important quote that you may want to have on your hit list of possible quotes. He's not a performer, he's a prisoner. Look at him. Look at what you've done to him. So it's a really important quote that encapsulates the entrapment of Truman. Christoph says then in response, he could leave at any time, and this is the one we've just looked at, if he was more than just a vague ambition. If he was absolutely determined to discover the truth, there's no way we could prevent him. I think what distresses you really, caller, is that ultimately Truman prefers his cell, as you call it. Well, you're wrong, and he'll prove you're wrong. And does he prove that Christoph is wrong? Hell yes. And even at the very end, Christoph is trying to persuade Truman to stay, even when I suppose you could say the horse is bolted when he's on the edge of the door. Here's another little aspect of the intro from that same documentary that's in the middle. The TV announcer says, 1.7 billion were there for his birth. 220 countries tuned in for his first step. The world stood still for that stolen kiss. And as he grew, so did the technology. An entire human life recorded on an intricate network of hidden cameras and broadcast live and unedited, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to an audience around the globe, coming to you now from Sea Haven Island, encloses the largest studio ever constructed, and along with the Great Wall of China, one of only 2 man-made structures visible from space. Now in its 30th great year, it's the Truman Show. And then one of the things that we've also noticed is that the guards in the control room who serve Christoph, so that's where Christoph's orchestrating everything that's happening, they wear t-shirts that read, "Love him, protect him," and you see him when the producers are at the wall. Are in the room. And of course it's ironic because they don't necessarily protect him. Okay, and then we have this next quote is from when Christoph is trying to drown Truman because Truman has the audacity to try to escape. And the executive says, and here they are over here on the right, "For God's sake, Chris, the whole world is watching. We can't let him die in front of a live audience." And Christoph says, "He was born in front of a live audience." Okay, so these are another quotes that you can use because it's showing that Truman's life was not his own. That Christoph wields the power of life and death over Truman. So that's another link that you can go to watch another clip. And that's the end of this presentation, and I'll have a look at some of the other themes in the next one.